The country or Kenya's judicial system is one of the instruments of the 2010 Constitution. But despite admiration for its independence, integrity and efficiency, the third arm of the government is somewhat challenged by two key events, which according to lawyers is an obvious response to the Supreme Court nullification of President Kenyatta's win in September 2017. The David Maraga-led arm says cut in resourcing will hamper justice delivery across the country. But the judiciary has much to do, and the big question remains whether it can deal with corruption and impunity within its quarters. And that is the subject of our discussion tonight here on News Compass. And we'll be talking to Philip Magal, who is lawyer and advocate of the High Court. Thank you, Philip, for coming on board. I do appreciate your time. At the center is Senator Roselyn Nyamunga, nominated senator at the Senate. Thank you, Mheshimiwa. I do appreciate your time. And next to me, or in my immediate right, is Harriet Chigai, who is the Law Society of Kenya Vice President, a key stakeholder, of course, in the judiciary. I do appreciate your time. And coming to you first, Harriet Chigai, you did file a petition against the Treasury, and you at the moment have an upper hand with regards to, of course, the budget cuts on the judiciary that was fronted by the Treasury now under the leadership of Ukur Yatani. Did you at any given point thought about the cuts as having a corrosive effect on the delivery of justice across the country and perhaps affecting the operationalization of the judiciary?
Thank you very much. The fact that we went to court already is a key indication that the budget cuts were going to affect the delivery of justice in the country. And that is why it's a big concern to us as lawyers. And it's imperative to note that various administrative arms of the judiciary were actually going to stall their activities, including access to courts. You've seen the tribunals have not been sitting. By cutting the budget further, it means they will completely not sit. You've seen as late as yesterday, some courts could not proceed with quite a number of their cases. Case in point, we have Kericho, where live cases are no longer, advocates were unable to proceed with cases because there were no sitting judges. Malindi is also a good example. The ELRC court could not sit, and there was a directive that the matters that were in court should now be taken to Mombasa for hearing. And when you look at such kind of movement of administrative action on the part of the judiciary, it highly affects the common mananchi because the cost implication goes high. It then means they have to travel long distances for them to be to actually get to be serviced in terms of service delivery from the judiciary. It's the cost implication on the part of the litigants is also very high. Let us go criminal and check the criminal courts in terms of the common mananchi who are currently being held on remand. The cost implications on the part of the remand prison is also very high because the same government still has to maintain these particular individuals in remand for them to be able, so they'll be held longer instead of us dispensing of justice in a very fast way. Also, you'll take note that facilitation of the judiciary administrative process is key. And there are various activities which, as we speak right now, we were all hoping that will go live, especially when it comes to digitization of the judiciary. And all this is geared towards service delivery to the common mananchi. How fast can we roll out cases? How fast can the wheels of justice keep moving? And definitely, the budget cuts are going to affect delivery of justice, which is something that we need to review.
All right. Yeah. Or looked into perhaps to avoid a sort of an avalanche sense of burden on the judiciary. Senator Roselyn Nyamunga, one of the key events that happened after the historic 1st of September 2017 nullification of the president's re-election was how high, or the moral high ground adopted by the Kenyan judiciary just more or less 8 years after the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution. When you look at that and the pattern of attacks on the judiciary by the executive and the exogenous pressure upon them, did they at any given point pollute the clear blue waters which were set by the 2010 Constitution between the independent arms of the government?
Thank you very much for inviting us to be here to look at some of the issues that are affecting Kenyans. And going to your question, all of us know very well that the moment the Chief Justice or the Supreme Court annulled the elections for the presidency, to the Kenyan people, it was a big win. And it was an indication that really the judiciary is independent. And that gave Kenyans a lifeline, looking at all the number of cases that come, touching on different criminal cases, cases like on corruption. So Kenyans thought that now we are online, and really Kenya was going to tackle most of the issues that are affecting Kenyans, and the judiciary will be so independent.
And there was that sense of hope.
A lot of hope that was raised. Of course, there was an attack, and it came from the highest office. We all know that, which I think maybe is natural, because, you know, Kenya, it has been everybody. The presidency should be above the law.
Yes.
And the trend that has been in Kenya is that the judiciary was sort of controlled by the executive. But that was a clear indication that we are off the hook of that interference. And it could have affected the president, because, you know, people are also telling him this is the first time in the history in Africa that a presidential election has been nullified. And it may have made him to behave the way he did, which also did not go very well for most Kenyans. But, and then after that, we have seen a lot of attacks. But I don't think that the issue of the budget cut is because of what happened in 2017. I don't think so.
Okay, what do you think precipitated or prompted
the budget cut? Yeah. No, in my view, first of all, budget, when you're making budget, you know, budget, you don't make it in one day. It is a process, and there is a constitutional process that must be followed. And it starts from about August, in fact, October, November, December, January, Feb, and there are timelines that are given. And then we know Kenya, we have very many educated people. The judiciary, I mean, treasury is full of technocrats who should be able to take clear indicators of the economy before they make estimates. But what is coming out clearly is that somebody somewhere in the judiciary, or in the, I don't know whether it's the judiciary alone or plus the executive, that did, not judiciary, the treasury. There must be somebody who did not let everybody know that there is a financial problem crisis in Kenya.
Okay, which is generally economical.
Which is very economical. Yes. Because you cannot do your estimates and read your budget in June, and then in September, when people are expecting you to start releasing the exchequer, that is the time now you say, the country is in a crisis, we do not have money. And you know, the president has said it in many words, many times, that we are broke, I don't have money, there is nowhere I'm going to get money from. So, so if it is coming, so it cannot be in June, everything is fine, but come September, there's no money. So I think it was discovered very late that there must have been some foul play going on.
And given that, of course, the general sense of the economy, when you have that cut down and the government cites perhaps a case of maybe falling short of the expectation in terms of the revenue targets, points to the accusations upon the president, isn't it, of a mismanaged economy?
But even with the revenue, last year, the revenue that was collected was only 1.4. Estimated was 1.6 trillion. They only made 1.4.
Yes.
So if you know you only made it 1.4, the economy has not been performing that well. What has happened all of a sudden, that instead of looking at those figures of the previous year, you are becoming even more ambitious?
And the question is, what makes the judiciary the vulnerable here, or the prey for that matter, in terms of the cuts? Philip Magal, you expressively talked about these issues, and the fact that you at some point, when I followed your, of course, analysis, pointed out that this perhaps the main precipitating element of this was the judiciary's independence and how it managed to conduct itself in the presidential petition in which it annulled the president's re-election. But let's go back, pedal back a bit in history. And prior to the 2010 constitution, the structure of the judiciary was frail in its structure. I mean, thin on resources, low in confidence, deficient in integrity, and so low again in terms of the public trust. When you look at that, where we are, and then what I have mentioned here, does it point to an imminent breakdown of the rule of law in Kenya?
What I can say is that of the three arms of government under the new constitution, the judiciary has outperformed the other two. That one is clear. It's simple. It's not up for debate. But then the conflict between the executive and the judiciary is not purely premised on the nullification of the 2017 2017 election. This has been a long way coming. We've seen the judiciary assert itself, and I can say to some extent it has blurred the line or the separation between the different arms. We could almost accuse it of what we call juristocracy,
yes,
or judicialization of politics. It has acted in so many instances without deference or committee for the other branches. So many times it has made or given orders which I think have rubbed the powers that be in the wrong way. Let's take an example of the affordable housing, for instance. An injunction was issued and it's still in place, meaning therefore that the executive cannot deliver on that particular promise. At the end of 5 years, it's not the judiciary which will be held to account. It is the executive. Along with that particular provision in the finance bill, the government was supposed to collect an additional tax of 1.5% from Kenyan earners. The government has not been able to do that. That is just one example of where I would say the friction between the executive and the judiciary is emerging from. And that is why you can see the executive taking the extraordinary step of not only denying judiciary the funds, but as well as stripping it of membership. We also know that the president has refused to appoint 41 individuals into the judiciary.
because of what it says, the government says is integrity issue.
Of course, that is, to me, that is just a pretext. But then what it is that there is a real conflict between these two arms, and there needs to be consultation. Otherwise, I don't see this impasse being resolved.
Okay, given that, you mentioned the fact that in terms of the attribution of the 41 judges that the president said had integrity issues hanging around their heads.
Yes.
There's also the element of corruption here. And when I point out one of the issues, because the discussion here, we've specifically touched on the Supreme Court here, which is just a cherry on the top of the cake.
Yes.
Because the Supreme Court, by law, doesn't try criminal cases, does not try civil or family cases. It's a second-tier sort of an appeals court, which is the ultimate arbiter. But then again, it has failed in some sense, isn't it, when we talk about that, because there is clearly a blue line here with regards to one of the key elements that it does rule on, and that was the Wajir gubernatorial case, in which it said, to just quote the majority judges, who said, "We find the Wajir governor's degree suspect. It cannot be verified. However, we find this election valid and in accordance with the Constitution, because though one is supposed to have a degree to be a governor, the governor has always behaved and conducted himself like a graduate when he never had a degree."
Of course, that judgment has been called into question in so many places by different scholars and even practitioners in the legal practice. Of course, there have been issues of corruption. We saw what happened with DCJ Mwilu,
yeah.
and eventually what the ruling was by the judiciary. We could see that the judiciary went out of its way to show up its independence. I wonder whether the same committee would have been extended to the executive had it been the DP who had been in the dock. And these are some of the issues that are coming out but are not being properly framed as such.
Okay.
Because the issue is, we are, under the new constitution, we have separation of powers. The executive has its function. The parliament has its function. But where we are right now, the judiciary seems to be over and above these two other arms. And this is really not, this is really what we are not talking about. And that is, to me, where all the friction is coming up. Once the heads of these three arms can sit down and be able to address this particular issue, I am sure this issue to do with the judiciary will have been resolved.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you mean that in any given scenario, the sort of unworthwhile relationship between especially the executive and the judiciary is uncalled for this time?
Yes, it is, and I would say it is because these people are, I'm sure many people are surprised that I'm taking this stand.
Yes.
But then we can see the judiciary involving itself in what we call mega politics. It is making policy decisions for the other two arms of government, which it should otherwise not be the case.
Okay.
Some of the debates that should be left to the political field, some of the debates or the decision that should be taken at the ballot, that should be taken by parliament, that should be taken by the executive, are instead being taken by the judiciary.
Okay, let me come to Honorable Senator Rose Nyamonga here, because it's equally important that the government position is known, it's clear for that matter, and explains authoritatively what it means by the budget cuts, whether it needs to push the money elsewhere. Yes, it has said so, but has never outlined what the judiciary should do. For instance, in the United Kingdom, Her Majesty Courts and Tribunal Services had to cut staff by 10,000, that is scheduled for 2022 as part of the £1 billion, 133 billion overhaul of the system. So the government of the United Kingdom said, we are investing over 130 billion Kenya shillings to modernize the justice system, making it more convenient, easier to use, and providing better value for the taxpayer. That lacks in our government, isn't it? And generally points to, again, another tragedy it managed, which is the economy, in terms of putting the country's economy to the point of wayward direction. How does it address the double tragedy situation?
Okay, that's a UK situation. I don't get your question correctly.
Okay, the government points to underperformance in the economy.
Yes.
It says that we need to have austerity measures, that's why we're having the cuts. In a point case scenario, we have the judiciary in the UK cut by about £1 billion, about 130 billion Kenya shillings. The government or the authority said we are doing so because we want more convenient, easier to use, providing better service for the taxpayer. That has been lacking from the government.
Yes, first of all, I don't think that the minister, first of all, has the capacity to do any budget cuts. I think they were just giving a notification to the judiciary that there is a problem here. And in my view, just as I've already stated, I think the government waited for too long.
Yes.
For the government to do the budget, because the budget, the estimates are done at the Treasury, and then together with Parliament. So I think either they did not know how far we had sunk, or they knew but they didn't know how to come out of it until such a time that now they could not hide anymore. And in the UK, the budget cut was meant to make the services better, isn't it?
Yeah.
But in our case, it's not going to make the budget cuts any better. If anything, it's going to hurt the economy even more. So there is a very big difference in how you cut it, how they cut it, and how we are cutting it. It is not helping the common man. If anything, it's going to sink and sink even deeper. And it is done at the wrong time. For me, I believe that we have enough technocrats in this country. We have a very long process when it comes to budget, doing our budgets. We should be more proactive.
Yes.
You know, you don't wait until you get to the river. Now you find that you cannot cross it. Yeah, I think we do it too late, and we hide our weaknesses also for too late, and then until such a time that we hit the rock, that is when we come backwards. But the minister has no capacity at all to reduce the budget for the judiciary.
Okay.
It was just an indicator for them and is raising a red flag.
Okay, and which was countered by the likes of Harriet here, who has a point here to express.
Yeah. Actually, what I wanted to say, and in support of what she's saying, is that let's first appreciate that the budget-making process is not a one-day affair. All these institutions had a budget, a draft budget, that they all appeared before Parliament and defended. And that process is not a one-month process. It took time. And out of that, Parliament passed a budget. You know, under the Constitution, it's very clear that that authority is vested with Parliament. And once the Budget Committee of Parliament approved those budgets, and from our understanding, the judiciary budget was actually given at its bare minimum, like its bare operative minimum. So what that then means is by the time you cut it into half, what are you saying? They can barely undertake their functions, barely. And when you see now that the administrative arm of the judiciary is now cutting costs by ensuring the little they have can support them in the next quarter or so until Treasury dispense of some of the money or they release funds for operations, then they are tied, their hands are tied. And it's also important to note, and for me, I don't want to believe we should be arguing from a point of brokenness, because the austerity measures and the directives given by Treasury cuts across board, yes. But when you look at the government expenditure, and we need to be honest about that, we need to prioritize our expenses. We need to prioritize institutions that are directly involved in terms of service delivery to the common mwananchi, and prioritize what functions need to be done. Currently, as we speak, we all want to fight corruption. And corruption is the biggest problem that we have in this country.
All right.
Now, when we are talking about fighting corruption, and the same institution that is supposed to dispense of these cases is the same judiciary that now is being crippled, what are we talking about? Where are our priorities? What exactly are we doing? Have we thought about all these things? Or we just wake up today and realize we are in a crisis, and because we're in a crisis, we need to do X, Y, Z. What we are not seeing is that we are plunging the whole country into some sort of crisis that even when the president wants to leave a legacy, it's being hampered.
Which is part of course, the legacy he wants to leave in the country,
Definitely,
in the fight against corruption.
In the fight against corruption. And take note, all of us are very keen. We are very keen, and we all want to fight this scourge called corruption or theft of public funds. And in my view, we need to prioritize the expenses. There's a lot of wastage in government.
Okay, that of course includes if you want to leave a legacy, you have to fight corruption. The cases will be handled by courts, and those cases are before courts of law. And those, of course, the courts continue to experience a cash crunch with regards, of course, the cuts that have been made or proposed by the Treasury. But the case lies in court. The judiciary has an upper hand with regards to that, or those who are campaigning for a more independent and self-sufficient judiciary, because there were no proceedings of courts in Nakuru County, in Mombasa, and other parts of the country because of the immediate impact that the cash crunch had on the third arm of the government. Welcome back. Here watching News Compass. We are into the second segment of the program here, talking about the all-important element that regards the third arm of the government and the judicial cuts. And let me come to you, Wakili Philip, here, because there is an important element that we need to understand. You pointed out that the fight might not have precipitated from the nullification of the 2017 elections, but there is an equally very important element here of the Kenyan government cutting ties to the International Law Development Organization, IDLO. That is an intergovernmental body which supports judicial reform process and funds the bulk of the Kenyan capacity building of our judges. And you point out to the other aspect, which regards, of course, what happened next after the nullification, of which the judges of the Supreme Court were pilloried or were called names, to the extent that we had a petition filed by Nyeri Central Member of Parliament Ngunjuri Wambugu. Do you point it out as perhaps the political establishment wanting a favorable outcome of a judiciary that they can manipulate and expect things to be done in their way?
Of course, the executive is not comfortable with a very independent judiciary. And so we've seen attempt after attempt to emasculate the judiciary. But then we have to differentiate independence of the judiciary with deference of the judiciary to the other two arms of the government. And these are two conflicts which are embroiled, which are coiled together. On the one hand, as Kenyans, as LSK, as Parliament, we need to stand with the judiciary and make sure that it's independent, that can deliver impartially. But on the other hand, again, for me, in order for us to resolve this conflict, the judiciary must have some level of difference to the other two arms of government.
In terms of? In
terms of not interfering with their mandate. Remember, we have three arms of government and each needs to deliver. But if one will be interfering in every step the other two takes, then believe me, there'll be the kind of conflict that we see. That said, though, it is important that the judiciary remains independent. And there are various organs which have really let down the judiciary. Number one, I will, and I'm happy that my vice chair lady is here. LSK has been a big letdown. Had it been during Alfred Mutua's time, had it been under Professor Tom Ojenda's time, we wouldn't be where we are today. Another arm that has, another body that has greatly let down the judiciary is the membership of the LSK itself. When they had an opportunity to vote for one of their representatives into the JSC, They voted along tribal lines. They voted along party lines. And we got somebody who could not secure the independence. Right now, we are in Parliament. Parliament, given the opportunity to give judiciary a proper budget, what did it do? It cut the budget by half. The chief registrar, who is the accounting officer for judiciary, requested for 31.5 billion. She was granted 14.5. And it is now that 14.5 which has been reduced by a further 3 billion. To me, 3 billion, this is what is spent for breakfast at State House. So the argument that we don't have money, to me, really doesn't hold.
All right.
Yes.
The money aspect, the economy. Senator Rose Nyamunga, when I come to you, a lot has happened ever since 2013 when the Huruto government came to power. I mean, accusations of mismanaged, mishandled economy. The World Bank recently said Kenyans are not getting service for the taxes they pay. And Parliament, interestingly, has acceded to Treasury's request to change the law so that the debt ceiling can be an absolute figure, 9 trillion Kenyan shillings. That is worrying, isn't it, considering the revamping of the economy, which at the moment appears to be on a abyss?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, when the figure of the 9 trillion was presented in the National Assembly, it was passed. Mm-hmm. But then it did not come to the Senate, and the law requires that both houses should at least should go through it, and also the Senate should also give their views on it, to accept it or not to accept it. So by the time it was coming to the Senate, it was you accept it the way it is or you reject it. And it was a very big debate, myself being one of them. I said there is no way. Mm-hmm. First of all, this year alone, this financial year, 2019-2020, they needed about only 600 billion. That is the deficit, over 600 billion. Then 2020-2021, they need about 400 billion. And 2021-22, they need about 500. So the total figure was coming to about only 1.8 trillion. So if there was anything to be added, yes, we should have at least changed the figure. It cannot be a blanket 9 trillion, meaning if the deficit is at 6.1, mm-hmm, and then we give them a window of up to 9 trillion, it means about 3 trillion. So to me, that's a lot of money. So we were saying in the Senate that why can't we give them even 7.5? Yes. Because that is actually what they require in the next 3 years. But they were at pains to have to have it passed. It's still an issue pending. We are not yet through with it. And I don't think that that is the way that it can go, because most Kenyans are saying borrowing is not bad. And any nation, for it to move from one level to the next, even in your own home, when you are doing developments, you can use your money up to some level. Then you need some backup or some loan to do a hop, step, and jump. But the problem that we have in Kenya, people are saying, okay, you are getting these loans, but what are they for? Are they going to be for recurrent? Are we giving a very big window? Why are we not dealing with the specifics? So that is still an issue that we should deal with in the Parliament. Okay.
Harriet Chigai, there is the important element of corruption here, and of course flanked by the accusations by the other sister elements or sister factions of the criminal justice system. Haji, the DPP, said that it's the missing link in the fight against corruption. Kinoti has been on the onslaught, on the offensive, saying that the judiciary is letting the fight against corruption down. And at some point during the Bomas of Kenya anti-corruption summit, all the stakeholders, among them the president and the deputy president, piled pressure on the judiciary. Here, though, comes one of the biggest allegations in the history of the Supreme Court so far, 9 years since the 2010 Constitution. An internal probe in 2016, February, recommended that Supreme Court Judge Justice Philip Tunoi be investigated for further allegations that he received 200 million Kenya shillings bribe to influence an election petition. He later reached the mandatory retirement age of 70 before he quit. We had the case of Philomena Mwilu, the assistant to David Maraga, the Supreme Court judge and the president of the judiciary, and the other whole host of accusations and the echo chamber of concerns about the conduct of judges across the country. It has its own house to clean, isn't it? And to go or to borrow the popular joke, why do you hire a lawyer when you can buy a judge?
Good question. Good question. We cannot sit here and pretend that corruption is a seed planted in one or two institutions. It is prime to note that the elements of corruption has entrenched itself in several of these state institutions, including the investigating arm itself, because judiciary comes in last, right? In between, you have investigations. On matters corruption, we have EACC, which is supposed to come on board. The question is, all these cases that are presented before courts, why are they failing? Is it an issue of poor investigations? Is it an issue of buying of judges, as you've put it? And the question then is, who are the players?
Okay.
Who are the players? It's also important to note, at times, it's important for us not to speak from a point where we are rumor mongering.
Okay.
When you put an allegation forward, it's important that you substantiate your claims by properly tabling evidence. If you say person X is corrupt, who are the players in between? There has to be somebody who picked that money. There has to be somebody who delivered that money. And it's a chain. And that is the chain that we want to delink completely.
Okay.
And again, it's important to note, corruption is there. And all of us need to fight this scourge. And it's not even with the judiciary alone. Some of us have actually been players, you know. By the time you remove money to pay a judge, what are you doing? Do you want to tell me you're clean yourself as the accused person, or as the person who is operating in between as the agent between the judge and maybe the lawyer or the accused person, or if it's the investigative arm? By the time I'm buying justice, what are we doing? So corruption is there. It's a monkey. Let us call it as it is. It's something that all of us needs to work together and fight, number one. Number two, when we also look at generally on how we are handling matters corruption in this country, I think we are all not serious. It's become more of talk other than action.
Okay.
I would wish the DPP prosecute at least 3 cases to its finality, and we have a proper case that has been prosecuted, other than us just having this flair of and euphoria of prosecuting matters through the media, because that is what we have been doing. And when you look at 2016, all the cases which were presented in court, actually none of them sailed through. And the big cases we are talking about, it was a matter of poor investigations. The witnesses who appeared in court ended up being witnesses for the accused. And this is in the public domain. So as a sitting judge, what can you do in an instance whereby you would really want to put these people in, but there's really nothing for you to hold them into account? So those are some of the things that we really, really need to look at. And when we look at the general usage of public finance, and that is where the big problem is, even as we speak right now.
Which includes the judiciary.
Which includes the judiciary. There's a lot of misuse of public funds. And this is something that all institutions now have to look inside and evaluate, where are their expenses going? Where can they cut for the purposes of reviewing the public funds expenditure in terms of service delivery to the common mwananchi? Because as we speak right now, the wastage in this country is unbearable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good points to note, but it doesn't actually give the judiciary itself a clean bill of health. Wakili Philip, coming to you, public perception, the trust, and how the judiciary needs to enmesh itself with the needs of the society, because justice is very important. More or less, it's playing a devolved, function here.
Yes.
Only that it's an arm of the government with, of course, money from the exchequer allocated by the National Treasury. However, though, the Auditor General, that is Edward Owuko, departed now, has cast doubt on the expenditure of more than 1.5 billion Kenya shillings in the judiciary in the financial year which ended June 30, 2018. Part of the money in question, 876 million Kenya shillings that the judiciary transferred to some 21 tribunals and 39 law courts which were supposed to be constructed across the country, whose contracts were awarded between 2013 and 17 were never completed. Gallup conducted a poll in which it cited 61% of Kenyans had confidence in the judiciary in 2013, as compared to 27 in 2009, 1 year before the new constitution. The gains eroded over time. However, from November 2013 to April 2015, Ipsos poll found that a number of Kenyans expressed a lot of confidence, in inverted commas, in the Supreme Court fell from 28% to 21% to 20% to 12%, and that continues to dwindle in a very tragic manner. That further dents the image of the judiciary, isn't it?
You know, when you deny judiciary the funds, and therefore it can't deliver, you can't expect its image to improve. The judiciary has taken a lot of beating from all quarters for all the wrong reasons. One thing I can say without fear of contradiction is that of the three arms of government, judiciary has been the least corrupt, it has been the least wasteful, compared to the executive, where, you know, open a newspaper any day and you will read of a scandal. You know, Kenyans are so used to scandal nowadays. They don't get shocked when 20 billion is lost.
They have become immune, more or less.
Yes, 30 billion lost in a row, you know. That is, you know, you sip your tea and go on with your life. Imagine if you had that in the judiciary, that judiciary had lost 27 billion in Eldoret or 5 billion in Mombasa. What would be the case? Let's look at the instances that you've given. And a good example is that of Tunoi, Judge Philip Tunoi, who was being investigated for corruption. What became of the investigations? Of course, it's not the judiciary which was supposed to investigate and prosecute. Somebody somewhere was comfortable letting the man off the hook. The judiciary is not supposed to investigate itself. If somebody has any doubt on the judiciary, it should come out clear, present it to the JSC, have the person sacked, and have them arraigned in court and prosecuted. So far, it has been rumors, more rumors, and rumors. And basically, to me, it still boils down to what I started with. This fight is not about corruption in the judiciary. Mm-hmm. It's more about the friction between the executive and the judiciary. Caused by,
to be specific, what? Because you have taken out of the equation the 2017 instance in which the Supreme Court
I haven't really taken it out. I'm saying it is one, mm-hmm. but not the only one.
One of the many.
Yes, one of the many. Of course, judiciary, I've said judiciary has grew bold, and over time it has engaged in what I would term as mega politics, or it has delved into policy making, which are the preserve of the other two functions. And that is why you see Parliament is unhappy. Today, if the good senator here tried to raise issues to do with powers and privileges of the Senate before a court of law, the court wouldn't listen. But should you raise the issue of independence of our courts before the court would be so eager to listen to it. Okay? Mm-hmm. And those are the distinctions which we are saying should be brought out clearly. Judiciary should try and limit itself within its mandates. Otherwise, if it's going to be making decisions on the salaries for the teachers, affordable housing, if it's going to be making who the president should employ, who the president should fire, how do you expect the president to operate? And if he can't operate, it is obvious that he will lash out, and that is what he's doing. To me, 3 billion it's not about lack of funds, really. Okay. It's really not about lack of funds.
Given the mismanagement at the level of the office of the president himself, because 2.5 billion Kenya shillings, the tree planting exercise money went up in air, and the other 2 billion he spent on foreign trips across the continent, still unaccounted for. He equally acknowledged that there is corruption in his own office. Yes.
Can I add that? Now, when we talk about corruption, mm-hmm. I think it should be very clear to us as Kenyans that we should be serious. If you look at the three arms, the executive, the judiciary, and parliament, what I see is a circus. If something touches parliament, because the last time we went to court, most of the time you see that the judiciary also wants to manipulate and control the affairs of the National Assembly, of the Parliament, mm-hmm. meaning the National Assembly and the Senate. So that one has also been an issue. So everybody is trying to interfere, and every time you touch another one, mm-hmm. it is a regrouping. In fact, it has become a tribal thing and a cocoon that the judiciary will protect their own, the executive will try to protect, Parliament don't touch us. If you touch us, we are also protecting. So I think all Kenyans, we must be serious when we are talking about independence. Each and every arm should be given enough independence, and there should be no manipulation coming from the judiciary or from the executive, which we see a lot of that. Every time there is a problem in Parliament, it is referred to the courts for us to give, for them to give a direction and determination.
Okay.
But it will be up. You looking at it, you will see it clearly. Everybody ganging up. So it means if a judge or an employee of the judiciary has an issue,
yes,
the judiciary will want to protect such a person, the Parliament, the executive. So it is a circus.
Okay.
And it's something that goes around, meaning that none of us is serious about the independence of each arm and about corruption in every arm.
Okay, mentioning that important element, because it's equally very significant that we point out that there always lies the important element when these three arms acknowledge they are independent but should be interdependent, because that again creates the form of better governance that Kenyans want. Harriet, I'll give you the last word here. Equally on an important note as we finish up the program, it's fundamentally unhelpful, isn't it, that today we are seeing, for instance, the criminal justice system at a point of break when President Uhuru Kenyatta is intensifying the war against corruption in the country. Do you think then that in about 3 years' time or 2.5 years' time that he will have a positive story to write home about the fight against corruption?
To be very honest, if the current trend continues, there'll be nothing to write home about. And it's important to know this is the right time to have this discussion, because then we have room to make amends.
Okay.
We have an opportunity to make amends. And I've always said that if there's any institution that all Kenyans should stand with is the judiciary. Noting its independence is very fundamental to this country. And also remember, where you have an institution breakdown and where you have a judiciary that is completely unable to function, its independence has been taken away, I can assure you that is a failed state. Because if there's any institution that all Kenyans, including those who are quick to say we shall revisit, will end up at the last resort, it's the same judiciary. So we should be able to empower the judiciary to be able to dispense off its duty without any interference, without any intimidation. We have seen in the recent past where court orders have been ignored by the executive.
More than 15
court orders. What does that tell you? We as leaders, we have a duty that we owe to those who we represent. And that duty is very simple: lead today for a better tomorrow, govern today and put policies in place that will advise the future. Because if we keep making policies that are good for us at the moment where we are sitting in those offices, it then means we will keep breaking and stepping on each other every other time there's a change of leadership. And you know, leadership changes.
Okay.
Leadership changes. So it is very, very important, and it's key that the independence of the judiciary, which also equals to its operations, which equals to the amount of money that they're given to be able to do their work, is highly protected. And that is why you're seeing lawyers are up in arms, because we are completely unable to facilitate our movement in this country. We are completely unable to satisfy our clients, because the issue of case backlogs will continue being the norm. Yet it is something that we have been working so hard to ensure that all this backlog of cases are actually handled. And where you have common mwananchi's complaints like, my case has been caught for the last 3 years, and as we speak right now, we are unable to put, to set hearing dates in the next year. They're actually being pushed to the 2021, and it's mid-2021 right now.
Okay.
So you can already see the court diary is already clogged. The question then is, if the trend continues, the tribunals are not sitting, the land courts are not sitting, judges have not been deployed, what are we doing to this country? It's the common mwananchi who's actually suffering. And I think it's important we review that.
All right.
It's very, very important that we review that.
Of course, which includes the fact that the Law Society of Kenya representatives in the Judicial Service Commission, that is Mr. Njeru, Macharia Njeru, who said that the cutting down on the judiciary's budget will not only grind its operations to halt, but cripple justice delivery in the country. He cites the cases of Mombasa, Nakuru, and how that has had impact. He also cited the 41 judges who President Uhuru Kenyatta was reluctant to appoint as judges regarding, of course, the war that continues between the executive and the judiciary. But, gentlemen and ladies, I do appreciate your time. It was a worthy discussion, and what a good end to equally a good discussion. Philip Magal, thank you for coming on board. Nominated Senator, Honorable Roslyn Nyamunga, thank you. I do appreciate your time. Asante sana. And Harriet Chigai is the Vice President of the Law Society of Kenya, LSK. And we hope that with better funding, probably the next financial year, if things will be amended, the judiciary or the third arm of the government will be a good umpire in the administration of justice in the country, as never the case, or the situation as is the case at the moment will come to dissolve by time. Thank you for watching the program. Always 3 ways to get in touch with us: on Facebook, facebook.com/EbroTV Kenya. On Twitter, the hashtag is NewsCompass and at EbroTV Kenya. This discussion will be uploaded on our YouTube page at EbroTV Kenya, and we are equally live streaming at www.ebrotv.co.ke. From me, Ayub Sheikh Abdikadir Abdi, and the team here in Lavington. We'll see you next week by the grace of God. Bye-bye.